Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic are the three most common DAWs in electronic dance music. They're the main DAWs that our students use inside of our Song Finishing Accelerator program in our popular EDM Foundations course, and the chances are you're wanting to know which one suits you the best. So today, we're going to be diving into these three beasts, going across the overall workflow, the main and lesser known features, compatibility and how they work with different software and hardware, availability of resources, and lastly, the pricing to help you decide which one suits your budget. Now, before we dive into these DAWs, it's just one piece of the system you need as a music producer. You also need to load these DAWs up with the right sounds, instruments, and beyond. So we've created our free EDM Starter Kit, which has over 700 samples, a bunch of serum presets, and a number of guides which will get you started on the right path. So you can download that bundle for free down in the description. And once you've grabbed that, let's hop in. And first, let's start with workflow. Now, I think workflow is the number one factor when it comes to choosing your DAW. It refers to the way a DAW functions in the most fundamental sense. Here's my overall take. Ableton Live is my personal daily driver and the DAW I use 99% of the time. I like to think of it as the AK-47 of DAWs. I'd say it's the fastest and simplest of the three. You can pretty much always see everything, and all of the stock tools are laid down in this bottom area here, so you're never having to open separate windows just to see the devices you're using. Browsers on the left, you've got a nice helpful help view down in the corner here. You can always see all of your tracks and you can resize them to be exactly what you need, hiding things. And there's a few key features such as right-clicking and freezing and flattening a track, which also speed up the conversion of MIDI to audio and bouncing things out, which I think the other two DAWs do not have quite as fast of a feature set when it comes to these kind of things. Now, FL Studio is like the Swiss Army knife of DAWs. It's capable of doing the same thing in a million different ways so that it can adapt to your personally preferred workflow. You've got the channels, which load up your instruments, your mixer track, which is how they mix together. You've got your arrangement here with different patterns and different lanes that you can move things around. So nothing is all linked to one thing, if that makes sense. They're all modular and can all move around. If you prefer a slightly more messy kind of go with it workflow, then it's the DAW for you, to be honest, because you can literally drag things around anywhere. You can choose between different patterns to paste, and you can treat it almost like a canvas, right? So you've still got a browser on the side, but again, you can detach everything, and everything works in windows. So if you like to move things around and focus on one window, it's the DAW for you. Logic Pro 10 is by far the best if you're from a theory or traditional music background. I like to think of it as the sword Anduril, I think it's pronounced, from Lord of the Rings. It's extremely powerful, but it also looks just really fancy, right? You load it up, and when people are making music and you're like, oh man, this looks so cool, like you know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. So if you want a DAW basically just to impress others, this is the one for you. But in all seriousness, the plugins look incredible. They open up in Windows separately, like in FL Studio. However, a lot of the main functionality is all confined to these individual panes, which make up the bulk of the screen. So it's kind of a nice halfway point between Ableton and FL Studio in that sense. It also just looks incredible, and the default sounds it comes with are just incredible. You can go through the default library, look through some of the keyboard sounds, some of them are downloadable, some of the drum sounds, and if you just like to load things up and they work, this is the DAW for you. If you're also part of the Apple ecosystem, it's kind of a no-brainer. So to sum up, I'd say Ableton for simplicity and speed, FL Studio for flexibility, and Logic Pro 10 for inspiration. Now, it's important you try each of these three options out and see which workflow is best suited to you. Give it a few days, play around with the basic functionality, and then make a decision. So next, let's talk about the second most important thing, which is the feature set in these three programs. Starting with Ableton, there's three additions here. You've got Intro, Standard, and Suite. Intro is good for basic production and live performance, but it's limited to around 8 tracks depending on what you use, so it's a bit limiting. The standard version has the full feature set in terms of being able to produce and can also do live performance, but it just doesn't have the full library of audio effects, sounds, and that kind of thing. And Suite is it all, has everything, all the sounds, all the effects, all the MIDI effects, so you can have complete unrestrained creativity. I'm personally a big fan of Suite. Get at least Standard if you're a serious producer, but if you can, I'd recommend Suite. I'm going to be using Suite to demonstrate here. There's a few key features which I really like. For example, freezing and flattening is one of my favorite things about Ableton Live This works, I'm pretty sure, in all the versions, but what it allows you to do is freeze a MIDI instrument and convert it to audio very quickly. It's doing an entire track here, so I'm going to right click and flatten that again. And now I instantly have the audio right in the place it was in an audio format, so I can then go manipulate the clip as an audio clip, right? And do those kind of things. So it's very fast in terms of that. Another cool feature is being able to go up in the top right here and switch between arrangement view, which is where I was, and session view, which is this live performance oriented view, which is also good for idea generation. You can go in here and create a MIDI clip of some sort. So I could go Shift Command M, probably do it in one where I can actually create a MIDI clip because that was a group. And you can actually go ahead and program in things and kind of create a little jam session for yourself. So I really like using that, but I predominantly stick to arrangement view, to be honest, as a producer primarily. I also just love the native stock tools. The audio effects on the side here are all grouped by type, and you can just simply grab one, drag it, and drop it on, and it instantly appears there. You can also just double click and tweak it without having to open a second window, and I absolutely love that. Obviously, third-party VSTs show up as this kind of XY pad, which you just have to go into and manually open and tweak. But the stock tools I primarily use in Ableton, and they're great. I can tweak this plugin, then this plugin, then this plugin. An honorable mention in terms of audio effects is the OTT preset, which is one of the multi-band dynamic presets in Ableton. It's obviously an iconic part of electronic dance music these days, and it just squashes things up really nice. Obviously, you don't want to use it all the time, but if you're wondering where the original OTT came from, it's Ableton. My last favorite but less commonly used feature is the collections, where you can organize plugins, sounds, presets, everything into little categories here so that they are instantly there. You don't have to sift through folders, and you can just simply drag and drop onto a new channel or an existing one. FL Studio has 4 editions: Fruity, Producer Signature, and all plugins. I'll be covering the pricing later in the video, but just know that Signature tends to be the main one that most people use, especially the serious producers. The Producer Edition is also very good. I just think Signature's got a few extra key plugins which make it worthwhile. And of course, if you wanted to go All Plugins Edition, it's got everything similar to how Suite is in Ableton. It just gives you access to the assorted array of plugins, which there are heaps of. Fruity Edition, again, is probably not worthwhile for a serious producer. Invest at least in Producer or Signature, in my honest experience. Producer Edition is great for just being able to make music. It's got mostly everything. A few effects aren't included, but don't let that deter you. It's still a great feature set. So some notable features is, as I mentioned, the mixer is separate from the channel rack, which is separate from the piano roll, which is separate from the playlist. It's all separate, right? And the cool thing about that is that I can program, say, a pattern with these different channels. I could use drums and bass in one pattern, and then I could paste that pattern onto my playlist as something new, right? And I can place that wherever I want. So I technically could go ahead and write an entire song in just this channel rack here. I could also secondly use the step sequencer, which is another feature I love about FL Studio. I don't have to go into the piano roll to start programming in drums. I can just start going in here. Now I've just got one of the projects loaded up from our EDM Foundations course. And I'm just gonna go ahead here and click pattern mode and just play this pattern. If I was just programming in drums, I've just clicked and made drums happen. I don't have to draw any MIDI notes in, and other DAWs really lack this functionality. I think this is the one area Ableton kind of lacks at speed, is doing this. Now, we work in audio for drums, so it's different, but if you're working in MIDI for drums, the step sequencer is a no-brainer. Another cool feature, and this is only in the All Plugins edition, is the amazing Harmor synth. So Harmor is probably FL Studio's most notorious synth, and it's got a really unique set of controls. I'm not going to be covering all of them now, but if you're wanting a synth that's capable of additive synthesis while subtractive, bit of FM stuff going on as well, it just really covers all bases. The interface looks really confusing, but it's worth getting into. Back to our piano roll though, let's get rid of our drums and go into here. There's some really cool features in the piano roll of FL Studio that aren't in any of the other options. You can select all the notes, go ahead and go down to these tools, and there's things like the riff machine. You can quick legato, you can arpeggiate, strum, flam. I'll use the arpeggiator as an example because it basically creates an arpeggiated version of the MIDI you've selected. And you can use different patterns, time multiplicators, gate the notes to make them shorter. You can kind of make them jump over different octave ranges, change panning and velocity between each of the notes, which is really, really cool. So if you're looking for a great way to arpeggiate, but not just in terms of an effect, to actually commit that to MIDI, FL Studio makes it really easy. My last honorable mention will be Patcher, which is basically a great tool to do sound design in. It's basically a second environment where you can go ahead and load plugins in here, arrange them and route them in really crazy and unique ways. For example, I can route this to here, which can be routed to the output. I can add a second version of that plugin, maybe a reverb. Maybe it goes to the reverb, which then goes here. So I can do some really complex visual routing inside FL Studio. So if you're into sound design, I highly recommend diving into the world of Patcher. And that's some of the cool features inside FL Studio. Lastly, we've got Logic Pro 10. Now, there's just the one version, which is fully featured. So you don't have to worry about selecting between different packages, which I think is really, really cool. It takes the decision-making out of the process. And as we'll get to, the price makes it even better. So stay tuned for that. But I like, first and foremost, the traditional feel of the mixer. If I just play my little song idea here. Oh, baby, yeah. I select each track and the mixer channel for it shows up, which I think is really, really cool. It allows me to see in a bit more detail the exact kind of signal chain from the beginning instrument through the MIDI effects, through the sound generator to the effects being processed to any send that's going in, all in a linear fashion. So I think that's a phenomenal, logical way of working. Another great mention inside Logic is the default plugins. They look and sound amazing. I, for example, absolutely love Amp Designer. I think it's not only a great tool if you're using a guitar, but it's a great way for electronic music producers to color their sounds. For example, if I go ahead and solo this synth here I've got, I can just go ahead and switch between different amp presets and it's just going to color the sound magnificently, right? This is why I've been experimenting with Logic a lot more recently, because there's just some great creative tools and they look incredible. As I mentioned, I also love if I'm playing a chord. It shows me up the top there which chord I'm playing, which is just always good to know if I ever need theory understanding of the decisions I'm making. It's just a great tool, one of my favorite, less discussed things. And also with vocals, I absolutely love the flex pitch. Flex pitch is like Melodyne built into your DAW, and none of the others have it. And I really wish Ableton had this because it's my daily driver. But what I can do is I've just got this vocal sample here. Oh, baby, yeah. Right, and what I can do is say I wanted to make this first vocal chop. I wanted to change the pitch of that last note, right? Oh, baby, yeah. Done, right? I've just changed the vocal note. Oh, baby, yeah. You can go. Oh, baby, yeah. Oh, baby, yeah. Amazing, right? All you have to do is select the vocal, enable flex pitch up in this little selector here, and you're done. And lastly, there's incredible presets. If I insert a new software instrument track here, I'm gonna delete the drum kit because I don't want a drum kit. I could go through the library here and go to all sounds, and it will show me the entire breadth, the full library of incredible stock instruments that Logic Pro has to offer. I could, for example, go to B3 organ, grab like a nice jazz fusion organ. Right, sounds great, sounds real and very organic sounding. Swap to another one. Sounds great. Let's go back to all sounds. I could go and find a nice keyboard sound, maybe this 80 wave bells. Like incredible sounds from the beginning. And again, this is one of Logic's strengths, is just the sound options you've got. They sound incredible, especially if you're making like melodic electronic music, right? It's very musical stuff. add some delay to that. Could be a nice little deep house synth. And there's a few of the main features that are inside the 3 DAWs. Hope this gives you a bit of an insight into those. So let's dive into number 3, which is compatibility. Good news is all 3 DAWs don't really have any major compatibility issues. They're usually up to date with the most modern versions of software. They're compatible with a lot of hardware units out there, whether it's MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, headphones, they all work. A few things to note though, you can't have Logic on a Windows machine, unfortunately, and it only supports audio units. So you can't use the VST plugin format with it, but that's okay because most plugins, generally speaking, create an audio unit version. A good thing with Logic Pro though, is the fact that it's likely to be updated in alignment with major OS updates pretty fast since it's made by the same company who make the OS. So it only makes sense. Both FL Studio and Ableton Live both support VST and now VST 3, which is a bit of a more high performance modern format. Only issue with both of these is because they're not manufactured by the OS creator. Obviously, there's a bit of a delay sometimes with major OS updates on Mac, but also on Windows, even though they're less common when those updates come out. So they may be a few months you have to wait before updating your OS. If you're using a Windows machine, either with FL Studio or Ableton, you may need to use different drivers depending on the interface you're using, or if you're using your default sound card, definitely you'll need to use ASIO drivers, which just perform a little better on Windows. Although Windows has improved as a platform for real-time audio over the years, Mac still has a few internal benefits. Now the difference is definitely closing between those platforms, so if you are, just grab the drivers and then you're sweet. In terms of the gear you use with any of the 3 options though, it really depends on other factors such as the plugins you're using. For example, if you're going to be using the Native Instruments complete suite of plugins, it makes sense to maybe grab a complete keyboard along with it. For example, if you're going to be performing live with Ableton, it might make sense to get one of the Novation controllers that integrate quite well with not only the Live's feature set, but the layout is quite similar. And think of it in terms of those kind of things. A last thing to mention is that Ableton and Logic both support what's called MPE, which is MIDI polyphonic expression, which is basically additional MIDI parameters that some keyboards use, such as the Rolly C board, to sense like the pressure and expression and the release and aftertouch and that kind of thing. FL Studio does not have direct functional support of that feature yet. So if you go into a MIDI clip in, say, Ableton, you can click on the note expression. For example, there's slide, pressure, velocity, random velocity, and you can adjust those based on the notes that are being played, etc. So it's really, really cool to be able to control that for each note on those 2, but not FL. Number 4 is support and resources. It's important to consider that you've got resources to learn these DAWs and get help if you come up against any particular issues. The good news is, again, all 3 are pretty solid across the board. The only issue is Apple, being the juggernaut it is, tends to push you more towards their knowledge base rather than the support, although you can still get support if you need for specific things, and they're pretty timely still. In terms of resources, you'll find plenty of YouTube videos, blog articles, forum queries, and more for all 3. However, Ableton's resources tend to be the most directly related to electronic music production specifically. This is good because most of you watching this, it being an electronic music production channel, or at least making electronic related music, will find that the tutorials and stuff out there are quite helpful in that realm. FL Studio has a greater quantity of resources. If you look at search trends, FL Studio is way more popular. That's also because it's very popular in the hip hop scene and other genres. So not all of the resources you'll find there will be directly applied to electronic music, although there's still some great stuff out there. Logic Pro, it has a growing resource base, and by no means is there a small amount. There's heaps of resources out there, so you'll never exhaust them all. However, again, a lot of them are applied to more traditional styles like pop, rock, and indie, which again, if you're making that kind of music, is great. I've found some great resources as someone who's experimented with those genres as well, and a lot of that stuff can still be applied to electronic music. And with that, we'll get into the thing you're all waiting for, that you know is a factor you're gonna have to come up against, which is price, number 5. Now, price is a factor, but since your DAW is the most important investment you'll make, I encourage you to splash out here. Don't hold back in terms of spending on your DAW if you can afford to, right? Don't buy more plugins because you bought a cheaper DAW. The DAW you actually chose wasn't the right one. Spend here if you need to spend it anywhere in your music production journey. Now, Logic Pro X is clearly the best value for money, and there's no debating that, right? It's a great tool, it's simple, and you get lifetime updates. It's funny considering how expensive Apple products are normally, but hey, can't complain, right? Now, one thing to mention here is that Logic has historically charged for major updates. So from Logic 9 to 10, there was a paid upgrade, but the paid upgrade was small considering the historic price of Logic, which used to be closer to the $1,000 mark, right? Then Apple purchased it, and it's a lot more affordable now. Ableton Live is by far the most expensive of the three, but in my honest opinion, it's worth every single dollar, pound, euro, whatever you're going to pay in. You do have to pay for each major update at a smaller upgrade price as well, but again, I still think it's worth it. I have Suite, I spent the money on it. They have great educational discounts if you are studying, and although it's the most expensive, Suite is just a fantastic thing. It's worth every dollar, and I'm glad I didn't spend that extra money on extra plugins or anything. Honestly. Of course, standard is a bit more affordable. It's still double what Logic is, but if you're after something a little cheaper, but still want live, you can start here and then upgrade later if you need to. I would then say FL Studio has the most flexible yet still insanely valuable pricing, right? The Producer Edition is $199, the same as Logic, and you get lifetime updates. The difference is the Producer Edition doesn't have the full feature set that Logic does. So that's why I still say Logic is slightly better value, even if you have to pay for one upgrade down the line. Logic, on the other hand, doesn't do major upgrades very often. They're usually more incremental things, constantly improving the DAW, whereas FL Studio does major updates all the time. Obviously, the more expensive versions are still a bit more expensive, but the All Plugins edition is basically the same price as the Live 11 standard. So if you're looking at that factor, you may even just want to go for this one if you like the way FL Studio works. Again, Harmor is included in the All Plugins edition, so if you liked the look of that synth, it's incredible. And I hope across these 5 dimensions, I've covered the main stuff you need to know about Ableton versus FL Studio versus Logic Pro X. If I've missed anything key, let me know in the comments and I'd love to address it. Make sure you grab our free EDM Starter Kit. No matter which of the 3 DAWs you choose, they integrate perfectly. Like this video if it was good, subscribe if you want more from me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.